The other thing is inventing is often about problem solving. You're solving a problem with better blocks. At the time, some people said to me, Warren, we want a block that competes with Lego. They didn't have a block. So their problem was, how do we compete with Lego? And I came up with better blocks. And a very famous scientist called Albert Einstein. Has anyone ever heard of Albert Einstein? Cool. Yeah, that's it, right? Thank you. That's very good. It took me. I'm sure I was much older than you kids before I heard of Albert Einstein. But he had a quote saying a really powerful quote that I always remember. He said, "You can't solve a problem at the same level of thinking that created it." Now, what did he mean by that? And it's like, here's in. Let's go back to my better blocks invention. Like when Lego blocks clip together, and I wish I had some here, they clip together and they just clip together and you couldn't move them, right? They just clip together from straight lines, formed right angles, and they wouldn't bend. So if I tried to invent another better block at that level of thinking, I would think, how can I make a block that just clips together but is different? And it'd be very hard to do that. But I had a different level of thinking. I thought, what about if you could create a block where the whole block moved? It's like Lego. If you want to make Lego move, you put wheels on it, and you put axles on it, and you put hinges on it, and you add things like that. But I thought, what about if you make a block where the whole everything moves? Wouldn't that be cool? So it was a different way of thinking about it. And from that, I came up with the idea of better blocks and the way we clicked them together. So that's kind of what we mean by just a different level of thinking. But interestingly enough, how can you, that's okay for a toy, but how can you apply that or use that different level of thinking on a much bigger scale? How can you affect the whole world by changing the way you go about solving problems? Well, here's one way to do it, and it may be a little different from most people, but here's one way to do it. And let me give you an example. Like you know how they put satellites and everything up into space, right? They shoot them up into space and they zoom around up there. Well, the problem these days is that there's getting so many satellites and things up in space that space junk is becoming a problem. Like we hear about the problem of junk on our beaches and on our rivers and in our parks and stuff. But we're doing the same thing into outer space. And that's a real problem. So how are we going to solve problems? How can we solve problems like that? How can we change our thinking so we come up with solutions, different solutions? Well, here's one of the ways we can change our thinking is that imagine if instead of trying to solve the problem of space junk by thinking, well, how are we going to get new technology to solve this problem with space junk? Because it was really technology that created the problem in the first place. Well, here's my question is what about if instead of focusing on the technology, what about if we changed our thinking by the way we just looked at space junk? And what I mean was, imagine if we just said to ourselves, how are we going to be kinder to the planet? We're going into outer space, a whole new territory. How are we going to be kinder and more respectful to the space? Now, if we say we want to be kinder to the planet, maybe we kind of wouldn't create some of the things that we've got now. Maybe like things like electric cars. Like see about electric cars, they don't have any pollution when they're working, but it takes a lot of resources to make an electric car. And then when we recycle it, it takes a lot of resources to recycle it. So they may not quite be so good for the planet as we think they are. Now, I'm not saying nothing's right or wrong. We've got all this cool stuff. But what I am saying is that instead of saying, how can we make new technology? What I'm saying is, well, is this new technology really going to be kinder and work for people, or are people of my age just creating problems like space junk that kids like you are going to have to solve? So it's just like it's about caring more for each other. So that's one of the things I really wanted to sort of say today was that um, it's our attitude and the questions that we ask are going to determine the problems or the solutions that we come up with. And it's kids like you who genuinely seem to care about other people and want to do good for the world. If you start to ask different questions, you're going to come up with different solutions. And if you start to ask questions because everyone's got a skill of kindness. So if you start to ask questions that more people can answer, you're going to get more answers. Whereas if you want to say, how are you going to develop or make a rocket that goes to the moon? Um, I don't know any of my friends that can do that. So I'm not going to get many answers. But yeah, if you just start to ask different questions, and that's the role of an inventor, it's the role of a creator, is to ask questions and come up with solutions. And I'm just saying, as an inventor or a creator, maybe we can come up with solutions or inventions that are maybe a little bit better for the planet and maybe a little bit better for the people in it. So that's really what I've got to share about my journey and as an inventor and some of the things I've done and some of the things that I'll probably do differently.